This conference will now be recorded.
Are we ready to go, Ed? Maya?
Ready when you are.
On down.
Okay, welcome everybody to the February 28, 2024 Tampa Nitrogen Management Consortium. We have a interesting agenda. And we've got an update on Piney Point as well, and we're hopeful that that will run smoothly. I'm Jeff Greenwell with Hillsborough County. I am the co-chair for the potable, the POTW and the stormwater side. I don't believe Tino's on today, so I'll be hosting the meeting, I guess. Did we decide? How many? We got 34. Do we want to go through, Maya? Why don't you take us through and introduce everybody? Let everybody introduce themselves. Although the number keeps going up, maybe we should just refer them to the blog.
Yeah, I think you can see who the meeting attendees are, and we'll also post an Excel spreadsheet with all the meeting attendees in the meeting materials folder on the Google Drive. I think we should probably just get started.
Yep, I think so. I agree. It jumped up from like 25 when I was looking at that to where we are now. So, and we can just make sure everybody who's speaking that's not familiar with the group, if you can give a brief introduction and background, that would be great. All right, with that said, Maya's going to present the 2027 Reasonable Assurance Update. Take it away, Maya.
All right. So I just have a couple of things I want to go over real quickly with you all. Basically, the last time we met, we talked about a few items of business in order to make the next Reasonable Assurance Plan update plan happen. That's due in 2027 to the Florida Department of Environmental Protection and the US EPA. So I just want to provide a couple status updates. First of all, since we began circulating the Declaration of Cooperation for this next round of the Reasonable Assurance Plan for Tampa Bay, we are up to 16 signed declarations, and you can see the entities that have signed on here. And then, if you recall, every 5 years, we ask for a voluntary contribution to help secure a technical support contractor to conduct the necessary activities required to complete the Reasonable Assurance Plan for Tampa Bay. So last year, we issued 83 invoices to those entities that have a nitrogen allocation to Tampa Bay. Of those 83 invoices, so far, we've received 20 payments, and those entities that have already submitted their payment are listed here. I know that this kind of falls in an awkward time in the budget cycle, so both Ed and I have certainly heard from some of you that you are still prepared and intending to make the contribution, but you won't be able to make it until closer to that October deadline, just based on the way your fiscal years work. And so that's great. So just wanted to give you that update of where we are. So those 20 payments, those amount to us raising $148,750. So we're getting very close to our funding goal of $250,000 that we need in order to secure that technical support contractor. So we think we're well on our way, but remember, we are, we are reliant on those voluntary contributions in order to secure the funding to support that competitive contract. And so we think $250,000 is what it's going to take to get a high quality respondent for what we're looking for. And so we're still falling short of that. So if you haven't been working that through your budget process, or if you have any progress updates on when you expect to get your contribution through the budget process, it's really helpful for Ed and I to know, because as we discussed, we are looking to release the request for proposals to secure that contractor. So again, here's the timeline for what we're looking at. I provided draft request for proposal language for you all to review back in December. Our hope is to let that request for proposals out on the streets next week in March. So you've had several months to review that. Those proposals will be due in May. We'll be looking for volunteers to serve on the review committee for the proposals. So if you're interested and if you have experience, particularly if you have public sector experience in reviewing proposals and would be interested on serving on that review committee, please reach out to me. I'll be interested in convening the right group for that later on this summer once we've received all the proposals. We'll make a series of findings and provide those findings to Ed so that he can make a recommendation to our management and policy boards, who ultimately decides who the successful respondent will be. We're basically shooting to get that contract in place for October so that we're able to continue doing the work to estimate the nitrogen loads, do the compliance assessment, the remaining compliance assessments, and incorporate all of the necessary information into the reasonable assurance plan in time for that 2027 deadline. So that's what we're working towards. I wanted to provide a little bit of space on the agenda in case you did have any comments on the request for proposal language that we had provided. Like I said, I'm trying to go live with that request for proposal next week on March 4th. So I can pull up that document and we can look through it if that's helpful. I haven't received any comments to date on what we put out there. So that's the update. That's where we are. We're a little more than halfway towards our goal, our funding goal, and so we're making incremental progress.
All right. Thanks, Maya. Any discussion?
Hey, Jeff, this is Chris Anastasio from Swiftmud. Just if you can, Maya, just a high level, maybe just go through the RFP. Since you didn't get any comments, maybe it's good, since we've got 37 folks on the call, to just kind of run through it real quick and see if anybody has any issues.
Yeah, I can do that. I did go over what the high level tasks were at that at the meeting at the end of last year, and that hasn't changed. It's just we're seeing it written up right now, but you'll see here basically what we're looking for is annual estimates of nitrogen loading and then a 5-year summary report. So that's task 1. Then we understand that the action plan database has, it's an aging database at this point, and it's sort of a pain point for some of you all in terms of ease of entry and to report on those projects that you've completed or have planned to reduce your overall nitrogen loads to the bay. And so task 2 is focusing on enhancements or improvements to the action plan database. And then, that sort of general support of working with you all to make sure that we have the best available information on those projects and summarizing all of that information into a load reduction report so that we can demonstrate that we are offsetting the nitrogen load that's associated with our growing population and everything that's changed over this last 5-year period. Task 3 is attainment assessments, so making sure that each bay segment is on track with the numeric nutrient criteria, those thresholds that we have established for each bay segment. Here we're really focused on making sure that this process is automated using open source and open science workflows, like we've been doing for many of the other components of the compliance assessment process. And so we're just trying to make sure that this information is being provided to you all in a transparent and timely manner so that you're able to, adaptively manage your, those areas for which you're responsible in the nitrogen load to the bay. So this is all associated with those attainment assessments, making sure that we're on track in relation to the thresholds. And then task 4 is focused on any sort of questions that might come up. So making sure that we have folks that are available and are helping to facilitate the meetings and discussions, technical discussions that may arise at the meetings, that if there are these kinds of questions for different issues that are outstanding that might change the way that we are managing nitrogen loads in the bay, that they're able to co-produce and work with you all on a series of decision memos, and that can be transmitted to regulators for concurrence. And then the final task is making sure that they are helping to compile everything that's required for that reasonable assurance plan update that's due to the department and the Environmental Protection Agency in 2027. So those are the major tasks. Again, if you have time, if you didn't look through this when it was sent out back in December, you still have time. If you can get me comments, this by Friday, that would be great. You can comment suggesting directly in the Google Doc, or if you'd rather send me an email with your thoughts, I'm happy to consider those and make any appropriate changes as well. Is that what you were looking for, Chris?
Yeah, thanks, Maya. I appreciate that. I was just curious, like, what your thoughts are on how the assimilative capacity work for Old Tampa Bay might fit into this. It looks like the schedule is such that we'll have the opportunity to incorporate any changes to the allocations for Old Tampa Bay based on that work.
Yes, and so there is.
You can't change allocations without opening the final orders. It's not a unilateral thing the NMC can do. You have to open the final order with the department.
Okay, so I guess that means that the results of that assimilative capacity study may or may not affect or impact how these allocations are updated for this RA plan update.
So Ed's going to go into some greater details about how the assimilative capacity assessment will dovetail into the updated reasonable assurance plan, but it's our goal to have at the end of this year an approach if reallocation is necessary, and have an addendum report that would be, going through that process that Jeff is talking about, where we are proposing to the regulatory agencies what we think is a reasonable path forward. We don't think that that's going to be, we won't have we won't have the final order and all of those kinds of things. That won't happen in that time frame. It may not even happen within the time frame of the reasonable assurance plan update itself, but we'll be on a path if that's something that we need to do. But we're basically, there's an output from the assimilative capacity assessment that is an RA addendum report, much like we've produced in the past when we had these kinds of questions. And that's something that will be incorporated into the reasonable assurance update that's submitted in 2027. It's just really hard to know what that's going to look like until we actually go through the process.
Okay. All right, cool. Thank you. Appreciate it.
It'll be pretty analogous.
Go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, I was just going to mention it'd be pretty analogous to the process between the 2007 and the 2012 RA update. Basically, the 2009 addendum served to develop recommendations for allocations, and then those were formally vetted in the delivery of the final reasonable assurance update at the end of 2011. And then, as Jeff mentioned, a final order was issued that solidified those allocations as department recognized loads to permitted entities in the watershed. So it'll be a similar sort of process of going through the assimilative capacity assessment, Old Tampa Bay, that addendum report funneling into this RA update, and then ultimately the department making a decision on how to move forward with those allocations if any are revised.
Correct. And I think that it's important to recognize that that process may change for DEP. That was a long time ago that was done. Originally, the one final order was signed by the secretary, and the 4 individual bay segment final orders were signed by the district director. They may want to do that differently. This study may find that you have causative constituents outside of nutrients. I think they're looking at temperature and light attenuation, right, Chris? I mean, I don't remember now. That might be another difficult bridge for DEP. They're typically looking for something that they can solidly hang their hat on. So all that stuff, in my mind, is sort of up in the air, and we would have to work with DEP again on the best path to open up the old, if it were to come to this, open up the old Tampa Bay final order and work our way back through what those reallocations are with each of the affected entities. So that's sort of my spin on it, having been involved in this on the other side of the table when this all went down 15 plus years ago.
I'll give some highlights on that process later on in the agenda too.
All right, great. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, any other questions on the reasonable assurance update information Maya presented?
Just to summarize, the main point is right now we don't have enough money to support the contract that we're proposing. So please let us know if you are planning to get that contribution in by that October deadline. We need, some kind of confidence that we're going to be able to have the funding to support this. If you have any concerns with the proposed request for proposal language, and you are not planning on responding to this request for proposals, please let me know as soon as possible, because we would like to begin advertising this. And like I said, if you are interested in serving on that review committee, please reach out to me.
Well, before we move on, is there anybody on the call that's a member of the NMC that intends to respond to Maya by this Friday? All right, Maya, I think you're good to go on that. Go ahead and move forward on it. If somebody changes their mind, they need to reach out to Maya by the close of business today. Okay, now Marcus is going to give us a compliance assessment update for 2023. Hopefully, he's got some good news for us.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm Marcus Beck, the program scientist at the Estuary program. Since I've been here, it's more or less been my job to create this annual compliance assessment report. And what this report provides is basically annual assessment to DEP and EPA as part of our 5-year reasonable assurance plan. So we have to do this every year, and there is a set process for which we create this report, and depending on whether or not the nutrient criteria are met in a given year for the different base segments, different steps of that process are pursued, and I'll kind of go over that in a second. But you can access this report. I don't know, Maya, I do want to drop this link in the chat, but as Maya was saying, we basically, we've kind of adopted the open science, open source philosophy towards creating these tools. So you can access this online. If you really want to get into the nuts and bolts, you can click this little link right here and actually go to the source code for this if you have any questions or concerns about how the report was generated, as well as the data that goes into it. You can see it all there. We're all laying out there that information for transparency. We also have, in addition to this HTML web page, there is a PDF document you can also download and print up if you prefer that. This is compiled at the same time as the web page, so the information in the PDF report is exactly the same as what's on the web page. So this is actually a new feature I think we have for this year's report. But to kind of break it down, there's 3 main sections to this. This front matter is just kind of a high-level summary of what this annual assessment report does. But then if you want to go and kind of understand what our reasonable assurance process is all about and how this report fits within that process, you can go to the second tab here and see this kind of diagram of how this annual report fits within that larger 5-year process. So basically, as I said, we have to report every year to DEP and EPA whether or not we've met the nutrient criteria for chlorophyll in the 4 major base segments within that year. And so whether or not we meet that criteria depends on whether or not the threshold is met. And if it's met, great, we create the report, we move on and sort of continue our adaptive management process. If it's not met, we kind of review the data and sort of kind of understand what led to that change or why that threshold was exceeded, and kind of describe it in the report. Now, if we do exceed that threshold for 2 concurrent years in a row for any given bay segment, we have to pursue different actions, and that's kind of why we are pursuing the Old Tampa Bay assimilant capacity study right now, because as you know, historically, Old Tampa Bay has not met the threshold for several years in a row, and actually 2 years concurrently within the last RA period, the 2017-21 period. So that's why we're doing that study, and it's all kind of built into this larger process. And now, of course, the outcome of that study, as Maya was mentioning, and Ed will give some more background, kind of defines how we pursue management in these problematic bay segments moving forward. But nonetheless, this annual report is a part of the whole process, reporting each year and kind of reviewing the data as we see it. And so this second tab kind of defines that whole process. Now, the third tab is the results for 2023. So this is the second year of the current RA period, so 2022 to 2026. So we had the same report last year, and this is year 2 of this 5-year period. You can kind of go through this description of basically the water quality trends and seagrass trends, and then kind of get to the bottom, you see sort of the meat of the results, right? So first off, we have this hydrologic load estimates table, and whether or not we have some compliance load adjustment factors that need to be taken into account when you're doing your load assessments, essentially because last year was very, very dry. Old Tampa Bay, Hillsborough Bay don't have compliance load adjustment factors, but Middle Tampa Bay and Lower Tampa Bay do. So the load estimate in that the 2023 was basically lower than the reference period here, and that's why we're seeing this factor being applied. So take that into consideration when you're doing your load calculations. But moving on to chlorophyll, this is sort of the most important part of the report, because we do have NNC for chlorophyll, and we want to make sure we meet the threshold in any given year. We've sort of broken it down by the major bay segments. This is kind of the long-term time series. And what's in gray here is the current RA period. So again, we're in year 2 of the 2022 to 2026 update period. What's also of note here is that we also have other sort of sub-bay segments down here that we haven't reported on in the past. We have Boca Ciega Bay South, Teresita Bay, and Manatee River. If you look at the older reports, we've never really reported on these. We've included these by the request of DEP, primarily because these are included in our RA watershed area. But take home here is that you see that chlorophyll is basically very, very low in all of these bay segments. And actually for the 4 major bay segments, this is excluding Lower Tampa Bay, the lowest measured chlorophyll concentration we've ever had since we've been monitoring in these segments since the 70s. So as I said, this is primarily a function of the low rainfall we had last year. So this is not really a complete surprise. This is a map basically of the annual breakdown of chlorophyll concentrations for the major, or actually rather the stations in the major bay segments. You can see things that are in red have exceeded the threshold. Things that are in green are meeting the threshold. So again, across the board, pretty low chlorophyll concentrations. You can look at a seasonal breakdown here. This is basically showing you 2023 in red for the 12 months of the year in the context of basically all of the other years for which we've been monitoring chlorophyll concentrations. And so this current estimate for 2023 kind of reflects the long-term improvement in water quality, but also just, again, the dry conditions we had in the bay. We're still waiting on data for some of these minor bay segments, but we're hoping to fill that in soon. So of course, all this is in relation to seagrasses. You know, we are hopeful to get an update, I think in 2025 from the district for the aerial coverage maps to kind of update this target. But as you probably know by now, you know, in 2016, we had our peak seagrass coverage estimate, and that has been a continuous decline in the subsequent imagery estimates that we've had from the district through 2022. So this is our concern, and most of those losses have been in Old Tampa Bay And historically, or at least in the last 10 years, we know that water quality has been exceeding the chlorophyll threshold in Old Tampa Bay, and we're taking a look at that now as part of this RA process through the assimilative capacity work. I didn't report on it here, but we do also do annual transect surveys through our partners. We kind of organize the seagrass transect monitoring program, and we have dozens of partners that go out and do annual surveys. This is sort of an interim look at seagrass throughout the bay each year that's sort of complementary to these district maps. But what we have seen actually in the last 2 years is a slight uptick in the frequency occurrence of seagrasses from the transect surveys. It's not, recovered by any means, but based on that uptick, we're hoping that we are seeing some recovery, but also thinking that this is largely a function of the reduced rainfall and lower nutrient loads we've seen in the last few years. So we are keeping an eye on that. We're cautiously optimistic that seagrasses are going to continue to recover, but keeping an eye on that each year. Looking at basically a breakdown of this sort of decision matrix for chlorophyll. This is putting basically the 2023 results in sort of this larger context of the entire time series from 1975 to present for the 4 major bay segments, and basically the remainder of lower Tampa Bay, which is going to be that Boca Ciega Bay South, Terracea, and Manatee River. For the current RA period, so 2022 and 2023, Old Tampa Bay has been in the green as well as the other bay segments. So this is good news. Of course, within the last RA period, we had those 3 subsequent years where we exceeded the threshold for chlorophyll, and that again is why we are pursuing the assimilative capacity work. So this is good news for this current year, but again, we had very dry conditions in 2023 and 2022 that we think is likely contributing to this improvement in water quality. As we know, drought is not a management strategy, so we cannot depend on low rainfall to have continuous improved water quality in Old Tampa Bay. Our management approach, at least in terms of our load allocations, we haven't really changed anything for Old Tampa Bay in the last 2 years. So this is largely just a reflection of interannual changes in precipitation. So we cannot rely on this to basically assume that Old Tampa Bay will continue to stay in the green. That's pretty much it for the report. You can see kind of a breakdown for all of the major bay segments, how the years up to 2023, 2 of the 5 years for this RA period, how they break down for the various actions in our RA process. And like I said, you can access this online. And basically, I think today we're looking for agreement from the group to basically approve this draft product for submittal to DEP and EPA. So that's all I got.
All right, thanks, Marcus. Appreciate that. Any questions for Marcus on where we stand right now for the 2023? All right.
Hey, Marcus, I just got a couple of questions. One is if we go back to the table for the hydrologic load estimates, just can you just expand a little bit about what that compliance load adjustment factor is all about?
Yeah, and I'm going to probably ask Ed to cue in at some point, but essentially we know that loads vary as a function of precipitation somewhat. So we are allowing this wiggle room based on how the rainfall or hydrologic load is into the bay each year. Obviously, the more rainfall you have, more stormwater runoff, that's going to contribute more nutrients to the bay, and that's not really fair to sort of wastewater load allocations or point sources that or stormwater loads, for example, that have certain thresholds in their permits that might be bumped over in a rainy year, or in a drier year, the converse could happen. And so essentially we have in this table, our reference period, and this is the early 90s of what, sort of our baseline hydrology is. And this is based on, I believe, the mean and sort of a deviation around that for those reference periods, or rather prediction interval. And so in any given year, so this is the 2023 compliance assessment, we measure the hydrologic load. That's what this column is. And if it is within this reference period, there basically isn't a load adjustment factor that can be applied to those loads. If it's outside, whether it's above or below, then a load adjustment factor is applied. And in this case, the load for Middle Tampa Bay and Lower Tampa Bay was below this range of values for the reference period. And that's why you see this adjustment factor being less than 1, because it was a drier year. And again, it's sort of the converse of rainy conditions leading to more load just naturally through rainfall. That's kind of my interpretation, but I wasn't around when this was created, so I don't know if Ed, you have anything to add to that.
It's accurate. You're right on point,
Yeah.
Mark. And basically what you see there in the table is Old Tampa Bay and Hillsborough Bay were both within a normal range. Maybe Hillsborough a little on the lower end, but as the reduction factor for Middle Tampa Bay and Lower Tampa Bay indicate, they were well below the normal range for the period of review, original period of review.
So how is that I guess my question is, how is that applied to the load allocation, or is it applied to the load allocation, or is that just there to be as an indicator of where you are relative to that reference period?
The stormwater entities would need to apply the factor when they report their load allocation.
Yeah, so this is really important for entities that receive an allocation expressed as a percentage of the remaining load. And there's entities in each of the bay segments that have basically hydrologically adjusted load allocation in each of the bay segments. And this screening level tool that was developed by Janicki was primarily to assist with those entities reporting to the department on an annual basis in lieu of us having the full loading information for a particular year. This was to give an idea of whether or not the loads that are being reported to the department need to be adjusted to accommodate the annual hydrology that was experienced in that given year. So when an entity that has a percent allocation in a particular bay segment has this compliance load adjustment factor, then they have to scale the loads by that factor.
Yeah.
So in drier years, there's less loads actually allowed relative to their allocation that they receive through the RA process.
Right. So when this was all going down, and there was a decision made to move away from the empirical model to a hydrologic model, originally the assumption was we would make the loads in the absence of that, but that did not work out. So Charles Kovich and I worked with Tony and Ray to work through this concept of, well, what was normal rainfall for the period of, what was the rainfall for the period of review, and then apply that and come out with an adjustment factor, normalize it to whether it's a heavy rain year or a light rain year. We worked through Felicia and DEP through the decision memo process, and this is what we came up with. So it does result in a compliance number that varies, and as long as it's storm driven, it is largely appropriate for most of our regulated entities, in my opinion. Of course, I helped craft it, so.
Now that makes sense, Jeff. Thanks. I appreciate the explanation.
Right.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and at the time, Charles and I argued that public access reuse should get the load normalization as well, but that was frowned upon, so we did not include them. But Charles and I both felt, when we looked at the data, that they were heavily impacted by heavy rainfall, basically. Rains a whole lot, people in general irrigate less. When it doesn't rain a whole lot, people irrigate more. So we felt they should be held to that standard as well, but they are not included in that. So that group is the one group that I think probably should have been normalized in both directions, because it cuts both ways. I mean, it's a perfect example of it cutting both ways, or cutting one negatively, and then they'll single, making them whole based on the original load allocation.
Well, it kind of goes back to the original allocation process of whether or not an entity And it's primarily MS4 jurisdictions that have this adjustment factor, but there were point sources that felt they were hydrologically affected in a given year in terms of their loading conditions and requested a percent allocation. So if they have a percent allocation, they're reporting to the department their loads with these adjustment factors.
Well, and there's no
And
question
I
they were.
imagine that when these allocations were done, like Jeff, you were saying, I don't know, it's about 15 years ago now, or the amount of reuse that was being employed at that time was less than what it is today. So, and I don't know, maybe that's a topic for discussion for your future meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, it's no secret, I think we need to move to a hydrologic model where you wouldn't need this adjustment. There's nothing wrong with the adjustment, but if you were to have the ability to do additional desperatization, you're going to have the ability to have a better understanding of where your load issues are specifically, you know, not just, oh, Hillsborough Bay is over, but oh, the kitchen is over, or oh, Palm River is being crushed. So anybody outfalling into Palm River needs to ratchet down. I mean, there were some other issues that don't get captured well, and if we ever were to get to a place to rework them, I think it would be appropriate. We do not have a lot of gauges around. We have a lot of gauges, but we do not collect data into our model from a lot of those gauges. So for example, I think we have a gauge on Double Branch in Old Tampa Bay, but we don't collect nutrient data off the Double Branch gauge. I think we have a similar situation in the south on the east side of Hillsborough Bay, where are we only using, I don't know if Ray's on, but I think we're only using Aliphi. Maybe we're using Aliphi and the Palm on that one, or the bypass canal. But
that's right, Jeff. Yeah, we're using the Aliphi River gauge down there, and then we also have for Little Manatee River.
So that might be, yeah. So, you know, Ray and I have discussed this in the past. I mean, that might be something else for us to consider to help get a better descritization within our existing working model. You know, add Bullfrog, add Little Manatee. You can't really add Manatee, it's all tidal. Add Double Branch. You got some places where we could get additional water quality data that might allow us to better understand or not better understand it, but target more specifically where these loads are coming from without changing our model. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And you know, you've also got the added difficulty of when you're in the tidal system, when you're in the tidal areas, that can be problematic, especially when you're trying to collect nutrient data and you've got to catch it at a certain tide, and it complicates things. But arguably, that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. I think that is a very worthwhile endeavor. You know, we're dealing with a similar situation in Charlotte Harbor, where Charlotte County has been implementing a water quality monitoring network to try to get to just that, which is what is the actual load in the ungauged portion of these watersheds, which are typically very tidal and therefore much more difficult to estimate. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try.
Yeah, and I think originally there were a limited number of gauges. So in defense of the original model, you didn't have gauges in these other locations. There still may not be one on Bullfrog. I would just propose that we put one on Bullfrog and start monitoring it. And I would commit my staff to that. And I think that I don't know about Kelly if she's on, but I'm sure they would be happy to do something similar in Pinellas County. But you have to be outside the tidal range. If you're outside of the tidal range, it's in my opinion, it just becomes too complicated and becomes almost more of a confounding issue and less of an informative issue.
But Jeff, how do you resolve that, like with respect to identifying those loads that are more proximal to the bay? Do you see the tendency to maybe miss those loads because we are trying to stay out of the tidal zone because it's so complicated?
I think you do. And I think that's a problem with our existing descritization of the model. I just don't know how you get away from it. We're so vested in this. I mean, we've been running this model for almost 30 years now.
I think we're sort of mixing sort of conversations too, because there's the general
Sorry.
loading estimates that are developed, and then there's allocations that are derived from those loading estimates that have historically been based on some reference periods.
Right.
The
No,
that the allocation compliance, relates directly to sort of the end result of how those loads are broken out to the entity. And I think we've made some improvements in terms of looking at smaller basin specific rainfall patterns to develop those discretized estimates for each of the entities in the watershed. But on a gross basis, the overall loading and what's delivered to the bay, there's arguments on model improvements that are needed there, but that you kind of mix in sort of the conversation with how that's how we create nexus with the allocations to entities and how they report on compliance. And they're kind
Yeah.
of two different conversations.
no,
Yeah.
they are two different conversations, and one of them's outside the purview of this group, actually, because the department should be, if somebody's exceeding this percent load allocation based on the normalization factor, and there's a chronic pattern of that exceedance, they should be, while they have enforcement discretion, they should be considering enforcement. And when I was at the department, we reviewed these every year. I can't speak to whether, I don't know if anybody is on from the district and whether that's still happening, but at the time we did. As well as the individual loads.
Yeah, I think the biggest consideration, especially over this RA period, and Chris, I think you alluded to it, is sort of the changing loading proportions from the entities represented in the consortium. We do have more reuse loads coming from entities, and there's been a shift between their point sources and the reuse loads. We've also been tracking changes in terms of just jurisdictional boundary changes and where those jurisdictional boundary changes are incorporating more MS4 load responsibility with entities. So when we make these assessments, we're using their current boundaries. And that wasn't originally taken into consideration when we developed the allocations now over 15 years ago, like you suggested. There's been land use changes that affect how we estimate loads, particularly in the ungauged portions of the watershed. No matter what model is used, in those uncaged portions, we're going to have to use some estimates that are based on land use and soil information. That has changed a whole lot since when the allocations were developed in 2009. So those considerations are something that I think the consortium needs to continue to grapple with. We've kind of had those discussions over past RA updates, but we haven't taken any actions in terms of formalizing any additional updates to the allocations to entities outside of the old Tampa Bay basin. And that's, I think, a relevant point of discussion over this next RA cycle.
I agree, Ed, and just the existing, there was discussion about making some building flexibility into the existing final orders, but that was in an effort to get the final orders across the original threshold. Those discussions really didn't go very far. And then that whole process that sort of landed in 2009, I think started in 2002. This is never an easy lift. I think the first notification from the EPA that we were exceeding the federally recognized TMDL from 98 was around late 01 or 02. So to Ed's point, we probably need to start having those discussions, but I don't see how it's in this RA cycle. Any other questions?
Yeah, so at the risk of continuing this conversation, I did have a very simple question, I think. Hey, Marcus, the figure 3.3, just remind me, so they're for the lesser bay segments, the smaller ones, it doesn't look like there's red dots in every month. Is that just because of the way the sampling the time period of the samples is collected, or?
Correct. So the 4 major bay segments are coming from EPC. They are fairly good with their turnaround time because, you know, these data represent the bulk of what we were reporting. So we've got, you know, full data for 2023 for the 4 major bay segments. Bogus Data Base South is from Pinellas County. Terracea and Manatee is Manatee County. I actually need to follow up with those groups to make sure I have the most up-to-date data, but typically it lags a little bit behind EPC. So I think last time I touched base with Pinellas and Manatee, I think they said mid-February. So this reminds me I need to update this before we submit it. But yes, you're correct. We are kind of waiting on those data just because it's lagged a little bit.
Okay, so the data are there. You just haven't updated this. They haven't caught up with this figure yet.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And just
All right.
another,
Go ahead.
yeah, just another clarification. This is mostly trying to relay sort of the history of this process to the full consortium. In development of the reasonable assurance documentation, the focus was always on the 4 main bay segments of Tampa Bay, because that's where the federally recognized TMDLs were established. When we went through the process to develop allocations in response to that federally recognized TMDL in the 2007 through 2009 time period, the department also wanted reporting relevant to these 3 minor bay segments. And at the time, we didn't have targets or thresholds developed for specific to each of those smaller bay segments. So what was decided at the time is we would report through the RA process what was called the remainder of lower Tampa Bay, basically looking at what the water quality conditions were in lower Tampa Bay relative to inputs from those 3 minor bay segments. So traditionally in the reasonable assurance documentation, you know, the compliance assessment endpoint is basically lower Tampa Bay for those 3 combined remainder lower Tampa Bay segments. After those allocations were developed, as some of you may know, the state went through the process to develop numeric nutrient criteria for estuarine regions throughout the state of Florida. At that time, chlorophyll A targets as well as nutrient loading targets were developed in a similar fashion to the other major bay segments. So those 3 minor bay segments now have chlorophyll A targets based on those numeric nutrient criteria that were developed and finalized in the 2011 time period. So when we continue to report on the reasonable assurance update for Tampa Bay, the department has requested our assessments take into consideration those numeric nutrient criteria. So what you see in these basic graphics for chlorophyll A conditions, those are relative to the segment-specific chlorophyll A numeric nutrient criteria that have been adopted by the department back in the 2011 period. When we report on reasonable assurance compliance, we're looking at the 4 main bay segments and the remainder of lower Tampa Bay segment, which is sort of the combination of those 3. So I just want to add that point and history to the conversation, because I know some are new to the consortium process, weren't here back in those days when we developed sort of those strategies to address the regulations that were developed over that protracted time period.
Just a reminder, this is an action item. We submit this report to FDEP and EPA on your behalf. So if you can please let us know in the chat that your entity approves submittal with the updated data as Marcus described, that would be very useful. Thank you.
So just a quick follow on to that, Maya. So to Marcus's point about updating those tables, will that be, I mean, I know those are not part of the compliance, so I don't know if it even matters, but are those figures, do you think those figures will be updated before this is submitted or not?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. That was some good discussion. I appreciate that, everybody, and hopefully there's some learning going on about the history of how this all came about, because I think that there's probably a fair number of us that were initially involved that won't be around for much longer in this process. So with that said, we've got Mark Raines, the state's Chief Science Officer, and John Coates. I don't know what your title is anymore, John, but I always thought of you as the department's fixer. So I'm just going to introduce you that way unless you want to introduce yourself with some other title. You guys can take it away on Piney Point update.
All right, thank you, Jeff. So as Jeff said, I'm Mark Rains, I'm Chief Science Officer. I think more importantly for me, and I'll use this to gain a little street cred if you don't know me, I'm a professor at University of South Florida, lived in Tampa Bay area for 20 years plus, raised 2 children there. One went away to college, came back and lives on the waterfront in downtown Tampa. The other's at college studying coastal water quality, and one day, with any luck, she'll move back and help us in Tampa Bay. So, like you, for the last 2+ decades, my family and I have watched things unfold at Piney Point and looked forward to the day when it's just sort of a bad memory in our long distant past. And I'm pleased to say, as many of you know, that we're approaching that day as we get closer and closer to closure of this chapter and moving on to the next. That does mean we need to reorient our understanding of Piney Point and our relationship to Piney Point. The biggest change is that we need to stop thinking about it as a potential threat to a catastrophic discharge, and think about it more as just another place that issues normal stormwater through a permitted NPDES outfall. And so I think that's going to be a complicated conversation for many reasons. And so we wanted to come to you now, not as our first and only stop, but sort of as a start of a longer term conversation as we help you guys work towards reallocation. So with that in mind, I am going to turn it over to John, who's a director in the Division of Water Resources Management. I think many of you, if not all of you, know him. And I think, Jeff, you're right. Like, we think of him as the fixer too. He's also the person who has the dubious distinction of perhaps knowing as much as anybody about the history of Piney Point, but also where we are today and where we're going in the future. So if I don't mess this up, I'm trying to share a screen. Did it work?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So because
it is there.
Yeah. Okay. So because we went to the moon in 1969 with a 64K machine, but we can't have a meeting in the 21st century without something going wrong. I'm showing what John wants to show, and he's on a computer where the camera isn't working, and I think talking to us by telephone. So John, why don't you take it over, and then we'll sort of set the framework and have a conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, and so Jeff and Ed, Maya, thank you all the Nitrogen Management Consortium members for giving us a chance, I guess, to do an update. And of course, in my current role, I've got lots of opportunities to break things. So all of you all who do know me, reach out and make sure I don't do that. So we'll try to fix things and not break things. But yeah, and apologies, I'm not sure on my end. It looks like I'm even on camera, but a couple of you all have told me that I'm not even able to display my camera. Don't know, Maya, if it's maybe we use GoToWebinar for our rule development workshops. I don't know if it's a software glitch on our end, but I can see everything and see you all who are on camera on my end. And what I want to do is we really want to talk a little bit about just high-level Piney Point updates. Of course, if you guys have any questions, happy to entertain those. And then spend a little bit of time in talking about the permit, which is a renewal of the NPDES wastewater facility permit for the site. And really, it is exactly what Dr. Rains, what Mark was saying. It is a permit that sort of tries to capture a long-term transition of this site from an operating phosphate facility all the way into what should just be, a grassy knoll with a patch, with clean stormwater runoff that gets a lot of attention because it is a former phosphate facility. So with that in mind, I wanted to kind of go back, and hopefully you all can see. And Mark, I don't know if you want to try to blow up a little bit. So I just got my list of topics that I do want to try to touch on as I go through, and I've got some very basic images and maps and photos. And I sort of switched gears when I realized I wasn't able to. I was going to use a map and do some views interactively, but so what I'd like to do, I want to talk a little bit about the site and talk about the court-appointed receiver and the work he's doing, talk about the closure plan, and I'll show a couple of figures from the stormwater modeling for the site. and what it is, hoping to achieve here in the next year or so through closure of the compartments that are left at the site. And then really want to talk through both groundwater and surface water related conditions that are in the draft permit and kind of where we are as we want to move to a notice of intent with a proposed permit here very soon, we hope. So with that in mind, Mark, if you're driving, you want to go ahead and look to the first map figure. Excellent. Yeah. So, I mean, I think you all know, better than I do probably, where this is in the watershed, but the site, the former Piney Point phosphate site that went into bankruptcy in early 2001 lies and discharges primarily to lower Tampa Bay. There are some discharges to the north that go through into Cockroach Bay from Piney Point Creek from the property itself, but the long-term focus on the phosphogypsum stack system, its last phases of closure, all of that drains to the south into the roadside ditches along Buckeye Road and over and across and into Bishop Harbor. So it is a discharge into lower Tampa Bay. On this map, you can see US 41 across from Port Manatee. So over on the eastern side, you can see the crosshatch area. That is essentially the footprint of the former Piney Point site. I guess maybe picture 3, Mark. So essentially, what I wanted to convey here was, so you've got a watershed that is on the order today. The green and blue areas drain into either outfalls 001 or 003, ultimately discharge into sort of a freshwater stormwater drainage ditch along Buckeye Road. Water moves off to the west under US 41, then ultimately south and down along Railroad, CSX Railroad right away in the drainage system there down into Bishop Harbor. This particular graphic attempts to illustrate all the green shaded and the blue shaded areas are areas that have been in the watershed roughly since 2010, when some of the last former closure work was done at the site. And a lot of those areas indeed were, in the watershed for what we would consider non-contact stormwater drainage, even in the 2007, 2008 and time frame. The site itself, other than issues the site has had in 2011 and 2021, has not discharged any kind of treated process water since March of 2007. So because of the issues at the site that focus primarily on the compartments, particularly one of the compartments, what we call the NGS South or North New Gyp Stack South compartment, both in 2011 and a much more significant event in 2021, obviously had emergency discharges, particularly the second one with a lot of nutrient loading, into Tampa Bay. The site 4 compartments were considered closed historically. 3 of those compartments ultimately contained dredge materials to some degree or another that was from a 2011 Port Manatee dredging project that the current, still owners of the site and they, not operating the site, the entity that purchased this site in 2006, HRK Holdings, had worked with Port Manatee, and the compartment you see there's in the center. So I don't know, Mark, if you could put a cursor on OGS North and OGS South. In this slightly older, it's in the sort of in the center blue, the compartments that contain dredge materials. I'm not sure if I can see the cursor on the photo. There I see it moving.
You see that? I'm circling NGS North, but it's essentially on the sort of...
Yeah, if you come to the south, so the OGS North and the OGS South is on those 2 compartments.
And then the southeast here is NGS South.
NGS South, right. So, 3 of the compartments, contained dredge materials. The OGS compartments where you can see deltas of dredge materials, those 2 compartments were the primary deposition for the Port Manatee dredging project, and the water overflowed, and so you had historically just seawater and a lined pond in the NGS South. And that changed in 2011 when there was an issue at the site with that compartment during the dredging project. And since that time frame, you had processed water and a mixture of seawater that was stored in two of the compartments, the NGS North and the NGS South of the site. So the two compartments plus the two ones that had dredge materials, the total acreage is a little over 150 acres of watershed. Ultimately, and if you'll go to the next sort of slide 4 or image 4 in this PDF file. So ultimately, what's changing at the site is the watershed is going to grow from roughly, for the stack system itself and the closure work, it's going to go from roughly 300 acres to about 450 acres of stormwater drainage. And so those 150 acres of crests and compartments will become non-contact stormwater contributions once the facility is fully closed. The different areas here, so the green areas, that water will be routed around through lined and long stormwater retention pond systems. There's a retention pond system on the north side of the site that's at grade. All of those areas ultimately would drain down into outfall 001 on the southwestern corner of the site. The blue areas will drain into outfall 003, which is a separate monitored and permitted outfall, into the Buckeye Road drainage system. And so the big change is you're going to add about a 50% increase in the non-contact stormwater drainage that's coming off the site. So clearly the stormwater model had to focus both on water quality, which we'll talk about more, as well as focus on water quantity and making sure that the increase in watershed that runs to these stormwater outfalls will not cause any concerns with the risk of flooding, offsite or downstream. So I think with that in mind, so that's the big picture I wanted to leave with you for what's really changing at the site in terms of closure and the watersheds that will contribute to the site. There is a picture 5, Mark, if we can go to that one. So I want to tell you currently what's going on site. So one compartment, and I'll show you a picture of that in just a minute. One compartment has been closed. That compartment was the one of the 4 that did not have any processed water constituents in the water at the facility. So that was able to be watered and put into closure construction first, while the site was working with Manatee County on the construction and installation of the UIC well that is currently receiving and taking care of the mixture of seawater and remnant phosphate processed water at the site. The picture that you see here shows the current activity at the site in January and February of 2024. So we have one of the 4 compartments is closed. The focus currently is the large NGS South compartment. Enough water has been removed from the site, essentially, that one of the large tasks in the sequence of closure plan activities is to stabilize and dewater the fine dredge materials that came from Port Manatee in the construction of Berth 12 circa 2011. Those materials form about 8 to 9 feet of soft sediments that are in the 70-acre NGS South compartment. So the most expeditious way that everybody believed would be successful, and what the court-appointed receiver is doing, is he is going through a process of having that material dredged back out of the NGS South compartment. With flocculants added, it is dewatering essentially, and as you can see, very large. Those bags that you see are large geotextile, geotube style bags. The dredge materials are pumped into there, and is used to essentially dewater and consolidate those soft, fine materials at the site. That, of course, has to be done to enable a cap to be reconstructed back in the NGS South reservoir compartment so that area can be properly capped and closed. So that just gives you a quick bird's eye view. There's one other view, the next slide, slide 6. So that picture there essentially gives you an idea of the scale of the geotube and the dredging operation that's being used to dewater and expedite the closure the amount of effort that you can see there that is being exerted by the court-appointed receiver to expeditiously close these compartments. The next picture. So this has the OGS South. So this was the one of the 4 compartments that did not have processed water, so it was able to be dewatered more expeditiously and go into closure work. Still a challenging closure project because it did contain dredge materials, a mixture of coarse and finer dredge materials that were deposited in that compartment. And essentially what you see here is, grass being established here. This was the end of January. Over this cap area, the material there is 2 feet at least of a soil cover over top of a new lined and graded cap. There are 2 items that are visible sort of to your left side of the image. So it's essentially the west piece of that OGS South compartment. You see a rectangular area. That is a sand filter system. So you have essentially on top of the liner, 2 feet of soil cover, vegetative system growing there, and a sand filtration system that is intended to provide routine and to increase the quality of stormwater runoff from this cap area. There is an overflow structure with downslope erosion protection that would be used, so if you have above a 100-year design event hitting this cap area, which is about, I believe, don't quote me, but about 27 acres. So if you do have an extreme, rainfall event, then the overflow structure that you see in the dike there to the left is intended to handle that water. The storm water off the top that goes to the sand filtration system, and of course, if any excess will end up becoming part of a routing of storm water that ultimately goes into an area called Basin 2, and Basin 2 provides some additional storage and attenuation, essentially detention, before it hits outfall 001. In the background, just for reference there, you can see the geotube staging area, which is located to the east, which is the background of that photo. So if you can imagine, that was the close-up that you saw a few minutes ago. And those 2 compartments are the OGS North, and then the far one to the right is the large 70-acre plus NGS South compartment. And if you could blow that up, you can see that there are 2 dredges that are operating, at the time of this photo in that compartment. So there are 2 dredges that are being used to carefully remove, 2 suction dredges, the fines from the bottom of that compartment to expedite its closure. So I think, Dr. Anderson, Mark, I wanted to go next just back to the list of topics. I wonder if we can blow that up, and I wanted to hit a couple of highlights and then really talk about the permit to everybody here. So the court-appointed receiver was appointed in the fall of 2021, and he is the entity who has funding that was appropriated by the legislature and is funded through the department. But he is a fiduciary of the court system, so he is responsible to the state circuit court, and he is managing the day-to-day site activities as well as managing and procuring and overseeing the closure construction along with the receiver's engineer. The site, in terms of water management for the remnant seawater and processed water that's ponded at the site that has to be removed to allow closure to those compartments to be completed, the receiver has an agreement with Manatee County, and I'm sure you all know Manatee County constructed a Class 1 UIC, underground injection control, deep well. That well was completed essentially at the end of 22 into early 2023. And essentially in the spring of 2023, there were sufficient quantities of water that had been pre-treated at the site, primarily by the court-appointed receiver, and they were able to start transferring water from the site to the Class 1 UIC well in the spring of 23. That operation continued essentially until December of 23, and at that time the county had completed construction of its own pretreatment facility, and so the county is currently providing a pretreatment process for this mixture of seawater and remnant fertilizer processed water, primarily so that you don't form struvite precipitation in the injection process, and you don't essentially form struvite and block and render the UIC well non-usable. So that process of managing water between the receiver and Manatee County continues. That is allowing, of course, the closure work to move forward. We talked about the general closure plan, at the site, which focuses on those reservoirs at the site. And the permitting is really what I want to shift and talk about next. So the permitting at the site permit, the official permit that is administratively continued for the site was to the prior Piney Point Phosphates entity. And so you have an administratively continued permit at the site that focused primarily on phosphate operations. Clearly that's no longer appropriate. The department had several times tried to work with different entities to get the NPDES wastewater permit renewed. Those were all, unfortunately unsuccessful. And so as 2021, when the court-appointed receiver was put into place, the court, of course, has ordered him to assume responsibility for all the environmental concerns of the site, including permitting. And one of the court-appointed receiver's tasks was to update the NPDES permit application that was still pending at the department. He has done that, and in April of 2023, the department issued a notice of draft permit along with a draft administrative order. The administrative order is necessary, the department believes, for two primary reasons. One is to address groundwater compliance and whether or not there are any changes that need to be made to the closure at the site to make sure that groundwater resources are being protected. And two, to address what's primarily, I think, of importance here, is to ensure that the site is ultimately going to be in compliance with its allocation of what, really the Tampa Bay TMDL. So let's go through that a little bit in detail. So again, in April of 2023, the department issued a copy of a draft permit and an associated administrative order, which is used to give a compliance schedule to the receiver and to the site to make changes. The site is subject to what, and Jeff, yourself, and Ed, and others were closer to the history of some of the discussions, but essentially the site has a interim reasonable assurance allocation for its discharges to lower Tampa Bay of 0.9 tons per year of total nitrogen. This facility's interim allocation was not subject to hydrologic adjustment. It is a straightforward item. The permit includes a final limit of 0.9 tons per year because that is what is applicable to the site for the noting and for the loading, and it is on a 5-year rolling average. Today, the site and its history and the water quality data from the site cannot comply and does not comply with that 0.9 tons per year. Thus it needs a schedule. Those items were looked at and discussed with EPA and their comments, as well as comments with other stakeholders that are important to the site. So we have two items we wanted to address in the administrative order, primarily for groundwater. The 2011 and really primarily the 2021 events pressurized the seepage collection drains that surround the stack system and the previous process water management areas, the cooling ponds at the site. So those, we know that overpressurization that happened within the drain system rendered the functioning of the seepage collection pipes that are buried around the perimeter of the site, and the stack system in particular, rendered those useless. And so we know that in compliance monitoring, both historically and in the others, that just outside the boundary of the site, there are groundwater concerns that need to be addressed. And so the groundwater schedule essentially has an evaluation to make sure we redelineate the site, redelineates and determines the extent to whether there are any fertilizer constituents that are pushed outside of the compliance points for the groundwater at the site. So go back and delineate that and come up with a revised groundwater monitoring plan. Some additional groundwater monitoring wells certainly will be in order, so that's one requirement. And the second one is really an important piece, which is to require an evaluation of the existing seepage collection drains that are extensive at the site, miles and miles of buried seepage collection drains, to determine whether or not any additional drains need to be added to recover in a reasonable time frame any groundwater that's pushed out from the site, as well as to determine whether or not any changes need to be made in the operating levels for those drain systems at the site. So that performance evaluation is important and ultimately is intended to make sure that the site is in compliance with its groundwater protection requirements. For the what I call the stormwater or the surface water management system at the site, similarly, there's a study that needs to be done, and it's called in the draft permit and the administrative order a stormwater quality plan. The focus there is to both evaluate the watershed as it exists today, evaluate its performance, and also evaluate the performance of the new area. For example, are we going to actually see an improvement that we expect to see? Are we going to see that improvement in the water quality that's coming off the OGS South cap area, since that area is now constructed and available for monitoring? So the study will evaluate the watershed itself, and Ed and others know the history here, at least or better than I probably do. But essentially, if you go back to some of the prior reasonable assurance reports that were done, updates that were done, the site in the 2017 timeframe was believed to be about meeting the 0.9 tons per year loading over the prior 5-year time period. So in 2022, that reasonable assurance update is consistent with the department's review of the data. That site was contributing for nitrogen loading about just a little under 2.5 or around 2.5 tons per year. So that, of course, is above its interim allocation, is a concern. And you add to that this very basic item that you're going to be expanding the contributing watershed to the non-contact discharges for the site. So there's a requirement for a plan that's important to study and evaluate the performance of the areas, determine what loading can be reasonably expected from the site in the future. In the meantime, we cannot issue a permit that a facility cannot comply with, so we have an interim limit that was in the draft permit that was published in April of 23. That interim limit is 4.5 tons per year. So that is notably above the interim allocation for the site. But that, we have reasonable assurance that the site will be able to comply with that. And more importantly, we're maintaining that the final effluent, loading for total nitrogen is the 0.9 tons per year. And as this facility gets constructed and the study gets completed, it's going to be important, I think, to share the results of that study and that information and the performance of the different portions of the site to figure out, what loading is going to result with the best that can be done for stormwater management from the site. Finally, the schedule has, I think, the most important component of the schedule items for the surface water discharges, if you will, of the stormwater quality plan from the site, is that they have to come up with an action plan of, based on their projections, what will be needed to be able, and I consider it to be ultimately in compliance with the Tampa Bay TMDL. So there is, a lot of work still to do at the site. Only one of the 4 compartments are closed. I look forward to seeing water quality monitoring data specifically for the OGS South cap area to see whether or not that drain filter system is going to generate better water quality. We certainly expect that it will, based on our experience in other projects where we've seen similar designs. And then ultimately, would like to come back at some point, Jeff and everybody, to provide just an additional update on how the water quality study is going and what we ultimately expect the site will do for performance, as it completes closure over the next year or two. Big pause with that, and apologies for any difficulties in walking through. And Dr. Raines, Mark, thank you so much for paging through that. And I'm wide open if there's any comments or questions that folks would like to address.
Anybody have any questions for John?
Not a question so much, Jeff, but just a comment that I'm really looking forward to seeing what the data shows. So I'm definitely looking forward to seeing an update on some of the water quality data as it comes available.
Me too. I'm really looking forward to that. You and I and Charles were heavily involved at the department with this. So yeah, I'm very interested in what the data actually provides. And John, you and Mark are always welcome back. We'd love to schedule maybe a regularly scheduled update. I don't know what frequency you would think was appropriate, and I'm not sure how fast the work is moving along, but every 6 months or something, if you'd be open to it. If you think that's too frequent, we understand. These things don't always move fast, but we would love to have sort of set that up and go ahead and put that out so it's on everybody's calendars. We meet, what are we meeting now? Every 2.5, 3 months, Maya?
Going to be more frequent this year.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's true.
Yeah.
We're happy.
Well, Jeff, we will certainly plan to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we want to make sure it's clear that this was not a one and done meeting. We see this as sort of a continuing, evolving conversation, and we're happy to come back on a regular schedule or anytime you guys have additional questions and you want to ping us with. So whatever works for all of us to keep this moving forward, we're happy to support.
Great. One thing you'll find is I think the NMC here, as set up by the estuary program, it's been a model around the country for private and publicly owned entities to sort of work together to find resolution to some of these water quality issues and estuaries throughout the country. So we're not unique. I mean, we are sort of unique in that fashion, so it might be worthwhile attending whenever you have the time. Mark, we'd appreciate your participation.
Yeah, the only thing to add, Mark and John, I dropped a link in terms of prior decision memos that were developed by the consortium when these sort of considerations need to be weighed in terms of existing allocations and any new expanded or missed sources that have been identified within the watershed in the past. That sort of has been the guidance document of how I think this process should proceed through the consortium. I think I started running through some of the calculations based on what you provide in terms of the 4.5 ton per year allocation for the site relative to, I guess, an estimate of about 680 acres. And that yield seemed in line with sort of nitrogen loads from open lands. So it didn't seem unreasonable, but I think the process to bring and close the loop on sort of the allocations with the consortium is that differential between the 4.5 tons that might be needed in the future for the site under full closure versus the allocation that was developed back in 2007, which is dated and we know now is probably going to be incorrect for the facility to fully operate it. That differential has to come from somewhere within the lower Tampa Bay segment. And I think you guys bringing those conversations to the consortium is sort of what's outlined in that decision memo. And I think, we would, welcome those conversations in the future. And hopefully at the end of this 5-year RA process, there would be some resolution on terms of an allocation for this facility under full closure that could be forwarded on to the department through the 2027 reasonable assurance update. So I'm just adding that as sort of my 2 cents, but I did drop that link in terms of the decision memo that kind of discusses this process through the consortium's RA updates. And it's also on our website here. It's this 2012 RA01 process for review new missed or expanded sources as sort of what we have outlined as modifying allocations in the future.
Ed, thank you very much. I also grabbed it from where you put it in the chat as well. I was able to do that and really appreciate that. And we also are very much looking forward to seeing the data. We hope that the extra effort and expense that's being done to try to improve stormwater quality off the new areas, will help keep us, hopefully the site will not need what we have put in as an interim allocation. We just had to come up with a number that we could have reasonable assurance that the site could comply with as it builds out. But of course, those, 3 of those areas are not even contributing today to the stormwater, discharges from the site.
I think I calculated somewhere around about 13 pounds per acre per year, which is sort of in line with open lands and nitrogen yields from open lands that I was able to find real quick. Again, that's all back of the envelope calculations I was doing while you're talking.
Yeah, and we had done similar, and so we felt like that, interim allocation was not unreasonable, but appreciate the receiver's decisions to try to do as much as he can to come up with some better stormwater quality off these new areas. Okay. Everybody, thank you for the time. Ed, thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys very much. Appreciate the opportunity to come and talk. And again, we're happy to come back as frequently as necessary.
Well, great. We appreciate it. All right, Ed. Old Tampa Bay Center Capacity Assessment Project.
Yeah, I know we're running short on time, so I'm going to probably breeze through this really quick. If there are any questions, please, stop me along the way, but I'm going to go quick through this. And this is just a general update of where we're at in terms of some of the projects we've been discussing, centered around Old Tampa Bay's assimilative capacity assessment that we went out for advertisement back last summer and fall, and we actually arrived at a contractor selection this past fall. So again, this is just an update from what I gave at the October 2023 meeting. We had a number of different initiatives that I talked about then. Those top 2, the Actionable Science Research Plan, as well as some of our ancillary seagrass temperature studies, is not what I'm going to be focused on today. I'm be talking primarily about the assimilative capacity assessment, like I said, that we went out for bid for last fall. Also touch on a little bit of another project that we will probably issue an RFP sometime this year once we receive an agreement from the department. We have some restore funding coming down that is going to help develop an Old Tampa Bay Stormwater Master Plan within the watershed, and hopefully bring down some resources to actually implement stormwater interventions in the future in some of those areas. So, just to jump right into it, as I mentioned, we advertised for this project over the summer and fall period of 2023. We brought a recommendation to our board meeting in November, and the contractor was selected at that November board meeting. There's 4 major tasks that we're looking to outline, looking to accomplish over the period of the project, ultimately culminating in what has been discussed prior in the meeting is a reasonable assurance addendum that would be submitted to the department and taken into consideration when we fully develop the full reasonable assurance update that is due to the department in 2027. So again, this is kind of looking at the disconnect that we've been observing in Old Tampa Bay relative to not meeting chlorophyll A targets while meeting the hydrologically normalized loadings to that bay segment. So the work is really trying to look at a refined approach to developing this assimilative capacity. The contractor team that was selected was from Stantec. They also have a variety of partners that are listed over there on the right side of the screen, from the University of South Florida in Florida, a couple of other private entities, Ecoscientific and Coastal Ecosystems, as well as folks that have worked on some of the prior Old Tampa Bay actionable science work through the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. So not only do we have a fairly diverse contractor team to perform this work, we also are employing subject matter experts to review the products that are developed over the next year. You'll notice some of those names. Holly Greening, former director of the estuary program, is going to be a subject matter expert, as well as Dr. Gerald Morrison and Rich Patuk through Coastwise Partners. Roger Johansson, longtime researcher within the region through the City of Tampa Bay Studies Group, and as a consultant after he retired. It's going to also be a subject matter expert, as well as Dr. Ming Lee from University of Maryland College of Environmental Studies, as well as Dr. Shuganda Shakur, who's been working with the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission's harmful algal bloom section. So we initiated this contract about mid-January, and we actually have a formal meeting actually Friday of the entire project team, including some of the subject matter experts, to kind of sort of kickstart the first couple of phases of the project. And it is a fairly aggressive timeline to get those 4 tasks done. I'll kind of explain those 4 tasks in subsequent slides, but basically looking to do all this work in the entirety of 2024. Those 4 tasks will require some draft and final products that are delivered to the estuary program. And I'm highlighting sort of the columns there in red. We also want the consortium to be engaged with providing comment and review of each of those interim products. So you'll see along the rows for each of those red columns where there's a green cell identified. That's basically a consortium meeting. We have identified to present sort of these draft final reports from each of the tasks to the consortium for your guys' comment and review that needs to be taken into consideration by the contractor, and then they would turn around a final technical report that ultimately feeds into the reasonable assurance addendum that would come by the tail end of this year, December 2024. So again, it is a really, really aggressive timeline, but we think we could get it accomplished with the contractor team that has been assembled. They've already started to assemble some of the data from some of the prior modeling work that was conducted in the region. And they're actually going to be proposing some new novel assessments again at our initial kickoff meeting at the end of February. So, just to kind of explain what work we're looking for in this project a little bit more in depth, our overall management paradigm through the estuary program since our inception has been focused on reducing nitrate loads in order to reduce the potential for algae, or in the form of chlorophyll A, to proliferate in the bay. That will ultimately improve water clarity and allow enough sunlight to reach seagrasses and allow them to grow and prosper in the bay. And that has been our guiding paradigm, which has set up all of the loading targets as well as chlorophyll A and now numeric nutrient criteria that have been adopted in each of the major bay segments. They followed from this overall nutrient management paradigm that we've been employing in the bay for a better part of now 3+ decades. We know based on prior research and what we're experiencing now that there's these other factors that are contributing to the expression of both algae in the form of chlorophyll A as well as the loss of seagrass in that bay segment. So this assessment of capacity work is under the first task is really sort of interrogating the validity of this longstanding paradigm and whether or not other factors need to be taken into consideration for Old Tampa Bay to meet its targets, specifically related to to help sustain the growth and reproduction of seagrasses in the Old Tampa Bay segment. So again, that's sort of the first sort of steps that we're tasking the contractors with. The second step after we have a potentially refined paradigm is really taking a look at the existing targets that have been developed for Old Tampa Bay. And there's both management targets that have been set up by the estuary program, or basically the ideal light and chlorophyll A conditions that we think are needed in that bay segment to support seagrass recovery. And then there's basically regulatory thresholds that have been adopted since the development of those management targets in the form of DEP numeric nutrient criteria and the federally recognized TMDL. So there's different values for each of those parameters that, again, are going to be interrogated during this assessment of capacity assessment to see if they are still appropriate benchmarks to attain in the Old Tampa Bay segment in order to maintain seagrasses in that bay segment moving forward. So again, refinements to any of these metrics would probably require additional discussion as well as decision memos through the consortium that would be forwarded on through this addendum and then ultimately decided upon by DEP and EPA as sort of new or modified regulatory thresholds that may be more appropriate to aspire to in the Old Tampa Bay segment. next task is really reliant on a lot of the consortium's input, as we've done in prior reasonable assurance updates. Maya mentioned it as part of a task of the 2027 reasonable assurance update. Each of those updates assemble all the actions and interventions that have been employed by the consortium participants over those 5-year RA implementation cycles, and then also ask the question of what projects are planned after those RA cycles. So on the right is basically the table that was inserted in the 2022 reasonable assurance updates submitted to the department, which basically identified about 421 tons of nitrogen load reductions from projects over the 2017 to 2021 period. There is actually another table in that RA update that indicates future projects to the tune of about 70.5 tons of potential load reductions from additional projects from 2022 on. And we know that other state legislation is sort of driving development of projects that will also have potential nutrient load reduction benefits within that bay segment, and not only the Old Tampa Bay segment, but the watershed wide. In particular, Senate Bill 64 will look at the beneficial use of reclaimed water more effectively in the region by 2032. So taking those sort of those projects into consideration, the contractor is tasked with seeing whether or not those interventions are going to be enough moving forward to meet whatever existing or new targets might be developed through that task 2 work that are previously outlined. So a lot of this is going to be contingent on reporting from you all on potential activity and investments that are going to be made from about 2022 all the way through the foreseeable future. So again, we ask that you all go to the action plan database website. I know there's some struggles in terms of getting data into that website that we're going to work on over the next RA cycle. But we want to know what projects and investments are being done by the entities, because that will factor into whether or not we have a comfort or level of comfort of meeting sort of our compliance and the reasonable assurance update into the future. And not only that, but any potential new sort of target that might be developed for Old Tampa Bay specifically through this assimilative capacity update. All that being said, we know that because of the Old Tampa Bay's ecology, that nutrients are probably not the only controlling factor. So under that task, we're also asking the contractor to take a look at alternative interventions that might have a water quality benefit within Old Tampa Bay that are either planned or proposed for the future. So again, those are things that might affect sort of tidal circulation, hydrologic improvements in that watershed, but not necessarily reflecting in a nitrogen load reduction. So those sort of projects are what are going to be asked to be looked at under task 3. And then ultimately, we alluded to it, if the targets and the ultimate bottom line for Old Tampa Bay changes from what was developed in basically the mid-1990s in terms of a nitrogen loading target supportive of seagrass growth, namely that 486 tons per year federally recognized TMDL. If that bottom line changes through this assessment, that potentially necessitates us taking a look at reallocating across all the different sources in Old Tampa Bay. And the table to the right is basically outlining both those point source, non-point source, and other sources of nitrogen loads that have been previously developed for the Old Tampa Bay segment and fully allocated at this point. And those allocations are listed on the rightmost column there. Basically, if that bottom line number changes, it's going to necessitate an adjustment across all those entities within the Bay segment. I put another sort of consideration alternatively, if the through this process it's recognized that nutrient loads might not be the only controlling factor in terms of creating conditions supportive of seagrass. If we need to sort of look at alternative interventions that don't necessarily have a nitrogen load input or allocation in the space segment, then this task 4 will kind of outline what other activities might be needed at sufficient scales to continue to maintain the targets that have been developed in the past. There's sort of a couple alternatives that could happen there. We're not sure where we might land under the task force. That's why we say if reallocations are necessary, we kind of be working through that through the collective consortium body, and then ultimately that will be formulated in the form of the reasonable assurance addendum. But it could potentially result in a reallocation of nitrogen loads to each of the sources, or it could look at, in lieu of those reallocations and maintaining existing loads, what additional work is going to be needed to allow water quality conditions to support seagrass recovery and expansion in that segment. So again, that's sort of a quick and dirty overview of what we anticipate this work to take place. And again, it's under a fairly aggressive timeline. We're hoping to wrap this up by the end of the calendar year and then deliver that report to the department in early 2025, where we could actually fully vet it and finalize it in the first quarter of 2025. Again, that was real quick. I don't know if there's any comments. I can't see any comments in the chat right now, but that kind of gives you an overview of the Old Tampa Bay Summitive capacity work that we're going to really engage the consortium over this next year on, and want your active participation and input along the way. The last thing I wanted to put on everyone's radar is, I think I alluded to this at the October meeting, and I've been, telling my management conference that this funding is coming. We've known since about early 2023 that we're going to be receiving additional restore funding to support implementation of stormwater interventions within the watershed. And this is sort of a parallel project that will also align with work that's being done through the Old Tampa Bay Assimilative Capacity Assessment, but it's going to be specifically focused on non-point source stormwater loadings that might be able to more effectively be addressed in the future, specifically in Old Tampa Bay. So we will issue an RFP for this work, which will be basically broken out into two phases. The first phase is looking at developing a multi-jurisdictional stormwater master plan for the Old Tampa Bay segment, basically that teal bay segment that is highlighted on the map. From there, projects that might be identified in that plan, as well as projects throughout the blue boundaries that are indicated in the map, would qualify for then implementation funds through this restore grant to the tune of about $8 million. And we're hoping that this project will kick off fairly soon in terms of issuance of that RFP. So keep an eye out for your emails if you're interested in that work. But that planning stage will probably run the course through the better part of this year and into the 2025. And then we're hoping to move into that implementation phase of actually putting projects in place, probably in the 25 to 26 time period. Some of the goals that we're trying to achieve through this project was outlined in prior modeling work through the Old Tampa Bay Integrated Ecosystem Model, where we identified that about a 25% stormwater TN load reduction in Old Tampa Bay, or about 90 tons per year, would probably have a water quality benefit in terms of reduction of chlorophyll A conditions below both management and regulatory targets that have been developed for that bay segment. So that's sort of what's guiding sort of the planning stage and the overall implementation stage. But I want to put that on your guys' radar because we will probably ask some of you folks, particularly in the stormwater areas of expertise, to help out with the review of some of those proposals, and then also be engaged in the planning process along the way for this bay segment. So I think I went through that in enough time where I left enough space for a last talk, but if there are any questions, please feel free to ask them now.
There was one question in the chat, Ed, about whether or not we would have draft deliverables for task one ready to review in advance of the April meeting. And that's our intent. We've tried to sync up the deliverable deadlines with the meeting schedule that we've proposed for the NMC, so y'all know what to expect when. That's part of our intent to try and keep this project on time and on track as well. So you should have a proposed indicator deliverable to review and discuss, and will be presented on at that April meeting.
So you guys, you need to pay attention when the notice comes out about reviewing this stuff, particularly if you are an potentially affected entity. Well, we want everybody's comments, but we are on a very aggressive timeline. We had some delays in issuing the original award. We had to go back out for bid, so we lost close to 6 months or more, maybe. So we really need to get this done by the end of the calendar year. Okay, if there's no other questions, we are having a presentation on climate change and stormwater nutrient loading tools.
So I think Dr. Alamdari is going to introduce.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I'm Nasrin. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Nasrin from Florida State. And with my student today, we're going to talk about the phase 1 of our project, which started last year, funded by TBRF. And our project goal is to evaluate the effects of climate change on runoff and nutrient load in a highly urbanized watershed, Sweetwater Creek, and how to reduce runoff and nutrient loads in Old Tampa Bay using different green infrastructure strategies. So in our phase 1 of the project, we just focused on the updating our stormwater management model, calibrating that, and then how we got the climate change data from recent global climate models and how we downscaled and bias corrected models, and also showing some preliminary results. Also, I just wanted to mention that we partnered with Hillsborough County, and they helped us for water quality data, plus getting the stormwater management model, and then we worked on updating that model. So I'm going to turn it to my student, Moshe, who did most of this work. And Moshe, I think you can start. I think we have a very short period of time, so it's just 10, 12 minutes, I think. So.
You're muted.
I think you're on mute.
Can everyone can
Yes, we can hear you.
We can hear you now.
listen?
I can hear you now.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. So thank you, Dr. Lamdari, for giving me the the opportunity. So also, good morning to everyone. So here we are. I'm going to speak about the study that we are working on the Sweetwater Creek watershed for the impacts of climate change in the Old Tampa Bay. So here are the contents of this presentation that we are presenting today. So the study area for this of the study is the Sweetwater Creek watershed, which is located in the in the northwestern part of the Hillsborough County in Florida, which is mostly urban built up area watershed, as 72% of the land is covered with the urban built up area. So also in this watershed, as we have seen, there's due to some precipitation, heavy precipitation, some flooding, some flooding can be seen, and also in the nearby watersheds, there are some problems regarding the increasing nutrient level. And in future for the for the impacts of climate change, this problem can also intensify. So for that, we need some sustainable solutions for that. And in that case, the green infrastructures comes in, which are some semi-engineered structures that which captures the surface runoff, and also by doing so, it can reduce the peak of the runoff. And also, like in that process, it also do some treatment which can control the nutrient level in the nearby watershed. There are some several studies that shows us that these structures can reduce up to 95% in runoff volume, and also some other literature that shows that it can reduce up to 72% in total nitrogen and also 80% in total phosphorus through optimally implementing these green infrastructures. For example, like bioretention, grain roof, porous pavements, etc. So based on this, here are the objectives that for this study, which is the first one is downscale and bias correct some climate parameters for future scenarios. Also, investigation of the climate change impacts on runoff volume and nutrient load. And the last objective is assessing the effectiveness of the stormwater green infrastructure in the face of present and future climate scenarios. So here is the workflow that we are following, which starts with collecting the climate variable data. We are collecting here like two types of data. One is the stationed or the observed data for both precipitation and temperature, and another is the global climate model data for precipitation and temperature for historical and also two different climate change scenarios based on the greenhouse emissions, like SSP 245 and 585. 245 is the median level and 585 is the extreme. So after collecting this model data, we are downscaling and bias correcting these global climate models based on the observed collected data using statistical downscaling approach. So after downscaling that, using downscale the climate variables, we are doing some assessment for the future climate variables by assessing for precipitation, assessing the depth, intensities, and also wet days, number of wet days, dry days. Also for temperature, we are doing some assessment to understand the future climate. And also, like using the downscale climate variables, after that we are calculating the rainfall intensities for different for different return period for different storm event, like 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, or 15-year, 10-year, or 20-year design storm events. And for this, we are dividing our timeline into three different timestamps, like historical from 1985 to 2014. For near future is 2020 to 2049, and for far future 2070 and 2099 for both SSP 245 and 585 scenarios. And after calculating this in return periods, we will be implementing that in the SWIM model. So we have also have collected the SWIM model for this watershed from the Hillsborough County officials, but it needed some modification. For that, we improvised the curve number and the imperviousness data sets in the SWIM model, and also we calculated the nutrient load export based on the land use, soil, and imperviousness data set of this area, and which we also will be implementing that in the SWIM model. And after that, we will run that SWIM model using all these inputs to assess the runoff and nutrient load for the future climate scenarios. And later we will input some green infrastructures in our model to assess their performance in mitigating this problem. I will run through a little bit in detail in the following slides of this workflow. So as I mentioned that we will be collecting data sets from the for observed data and also the model data. So these are the list of GCM models that we are considering for this study. And this is, we considered this model based on some literature review, which shows us this 8 model is the most representative models for the for the state of Florida, and this in this list, it also shows the horizontal resolution and the references that we are using. So after collecting those GCMs and the observed data set, we are downscaling and bias correcting the climate variables. So we are using a statistical downscaling approach. At first, we started using the empirical quantile mapping approach, which transforms the model data sets based on its cumulative distribution and transform it based on the observed model variable data set. But further studies shows that in the empirical quantile mapping approach, it it faces some difficulties on projecting the future extremes data sets. So after that, so we improvised based on another literature, which shows like by including a linear correction in this empirical quantile approach, it successfully captures those extreme events in the future. So we incorporated the empirical quantile mapping with a linear correction approach in our study for downscaling and bias correcting the variables. So in this process, you can show based on the downscaling bias correction of the daily precipitation and temperature that we have done for this study, which shows like before linear correction, it fails to capture the extreme variables for precipitation and temperature, but after incorporating that linear correction, it works better than without the linear correction. And we are incorporating this approach by dividing the data set based on monthly basis. So for each month, it is downscaling separately, which is giving us a better results for the downscaling and bias correcting approach. So we also have did a study previously using this approach for the South Florida, South and Central part of the Florida. And recently we have submitted a journal paper based on that, which is currently under review. So after downscaling and bias correcting, so here I'm showing some results. In this graph, it's showing the annual total, the moving average of the annual total precipitation from the historical to from 1985 to 2100 year, how the precipitation is changing. Though in this diagram, you can see that by total precipitation that in future it is slightly decreasing, but we have done some further analysis on the extreme levels of this study, also which we also incorporated in calculating the rainfall intensities into future scenarios, which shows us the extremes will increase in future. And also in the study that we did in the South Florida part, which also showed us that there will be some increase in the in the number of wet days in the future scenarios. So we are incorporating those analyses in this study, and we're hoping that it will also show some increasing wet days and increasing wet days in the future also for this study. So here are also for the annual maximum temperature data set, which shows that in future, for 8 different models, it shows like the the maximum temperature will increase. And it's also a moving average on the annual maximum temperatures. So after downscaling and bias correcting the data sets, we are using the precipitation data, we are calculating the rainfall intensities for different design storm periods. So for this, we have followed the NOAA Atlas methodology for this, where at first what we are getting for the historical data, we have divided our divided the data into different timestamps for historical, as I showed uh, in the previously workflow. So based on that, for each timestamp, we are calculating the annual maximum rainfall data set, and then we are putting them in these different distributions, like normal, generalized extreme value or GEV, Weibull, and Gamma distribution to see which one fits better. And then based on that, we are calculating the frequency of each rainfall for the rainfall for each return period, which later we compared with the NOAA data from the NOAA Atlas rainfall frequency, and which, as you can see, that there are some very minimal error based on the methodology. So using this methodology, we are calculating the rainfall intensity, and after and in this diagram, it shows like the rainfall intensities for different GCMs, which will act as an input in our swim model in the later steps. So after calculating the rainfall intensities, we needed some improvisation in the swim model that we got from the Hillsborough County officials. So first was we have improvised the curve number in the model, and also updated the imperviousness data sets in that model, and we calculated this curve number based on the soil data, imperviousness data, and the land use, land cover data that was readily available from USGS and FDP. And also we have incorporated the imperviousness data from the MLCR website. So after that, we also, based on the soil, land use, and imperviousness data set, we also calculated the event mean concentration for both total nitrogen and phosphorus. So for this, we have followed a methodology from the EPA, which showed and also an equation from the US EPA. Following those methodologies, we have calculated those EMC value for total nitrogen and phosphorus and incorporated that in our study in the model. And previously in the model, it was the urban area was denoted totally as a built-up urban area. So for our study, as we are mostly as this watershed is a highly urbanized area. So for that, we have divided that built-up urban area into different parts, like expanded a little bit, like dividing it into commercial, industrial, residential areas, and also incorporated the other land use types like agricultural, rangeland, and upland forests, which are available in this watershed. So here, as you can see, the EMC values and also the model, updated model that we have incorporated for this study. So after that, we did run some calibration for the runoff volume and the nutrient loads. For the calibration process, what we did here was after we run the model for the historical rainfall intensities for different return periods, and we compared our results for different peak event in the historical data, historical time frame, which was 1985 to 2014. and compared the model result with the observed peak runoff data in that time frame. We collected the data from the USGS and compared after running the model and doing the calibration. We did some error assessment, and also calculated the R-square and NNC for that, which shows that the model is working better. And it also has some very fewer errors after running the model in case of the runoff volume. Also, for the nutrient load, we also ran the model and followed the similar approach. And for this, we got the nutrient load data from the Hillsborough County officials for that historical time period. And we ran some calibration and also calculated some error characteristics, which also shows us the model is working well for this study area. So after this, the next steps that we need to do for this study is to running this swim model for the different GCMs based on the rainfall intensities that we have developed. Also, we will be incorporating the temperature and the evapotranspiration data in this model, so that the model can work as a robust one. So after that, we will include some GI location for GIs in green infrastructures in this swim model. As for the swim model, we are also doing it in the PC swim, where we can add several green infrastructures in the model. So that we are going to do, and after that we will run the swim model with and without the green infrastructures to see how or what will be the future situation for the runoff volume and the nutrient, and how these green infrastructures will work in mitigating this problem for this watershed. So thank you for giving us the opportunity to present. And if you have any comments or any suggestions, please let us know.
Couple of things that I would like to add before the questions. Sorry, I know that we are out of time, but I just want you to add some couple of stuff. So for the green infrastructure siting and locations, I think Dr. Rains is not here, but we got the funding from FDP 2 years ago, and we developed a planning decision support tool for green infrastructure planning. So the first phase of the project is actually for the siting part of the project, where we can implement those green infrastructure. And the second part of the project is about the optimal solutions, like what are the most cost-effective solutions. So we're going to probably use that tool to come up with the most cost-effective solution, and also the siting part, like where those green infrastructure can be located. And then we're going to incorporate that in our model to see how climate change will affect how green infrastructure can be used and adaptation strategies. And the second step for the climate change, thank you, Maya, for sending that email. We actually did that for South Florida for 27 stations. We use this hybrid method. This is a new methodology. And we also compared our results. So this is a CMIP6. We compared our results with Oak Ridge. Oak Ridge National Lab did the comprehensive study in the US, all the stations, and they also use different downscaling bias correction method. We compared our results and we talked to them as well. Actually, for the paper that's under review, we collaborated with those Oak Ridge people as well, and we compared. Another thing that we are also doing, we also got NASA data. NASA also did some downscaling bias correction on CMIP6, and they have it for all the stations. We also got the data. We are also comparing our data with them. But thank you for sending that email. I just took a note. We also reach out to Tampa Bay Water to make sure that we are also on track for the climate change downscaling bias correction. But this is just phase one of our project. still continues. We have 2 more years to finish this project. So we're going to incorporate those climate change, green infrastructure strategies to see how they can be used as adaptation strategies. But that would be very helpful if you can give us a feedback. I know that we're out of time, but if you can send us an email, that would be nice. So
If y'all can drop your emails in the chat, so folks know where to send things. Otherwise, for those of you on the call, you can email me and I'll forward your questions and comments along to the project.
if you're actually looking for this tool presentation, we actually presented our planning tools because somebody asked about the tool. We actually presented our tool to FDP staff in 2 weeks, 2 weeks ago. And actually, we need some more people. So the deadline for giving this tool out is one year from now. But from now on, we need to actually have more people using this tool, see that if the tool works great and everything makes sense in the area. It's a very cool tool. Hopefully, we can get more people engaged to have some hands-on activities, use the tool and see the results and see if that makes sense for their neighborhoods or local areas. So I'm working with FDP to engage more people and going to different, like having different workshops to present the tool. So,
Awesome.
All right, sounds good.
Just one other sort of point, and you guys might not be aware, it might be too far along in the process, but there is an updated impervious layer that was developed through NOAA's CCAP assessment that's at a finer resolution, and it's, I think, for the 2022 or 2023 time period. So it's probably an improvement of the USGS layer that you might be using for some of the swim inputs. Just to throw it out there.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think it's readily available through NOAA's websites to download for the Tampa Bay region.
Can you know what is that exactly? Noah, so you said that it's updated, like
Impervious layer for
impervious. Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
I think the
That sounds great.
USGS one is a bit dated now, so that one's probably the most representative of current conditions in the watershed.
Is anyone working on updating EMCs? So we are actually calculating EMCs based on land use, land cover data. Is that a question from us? If it is, yes, we are actually calculating the EMCs based on land cover data that we have in our watershed. So you're not using the EMCs that was there for 1990. No, you're using based on the current land use, land cover data. And also, I'm gonna just get the email address that Jonah. So I'm gonna just probably take a photo from your email address, and I can send you the tool actually. So I'm just looking for more people to use the tool. So what do you mean by the land use are still contributing the same values? You mean, so yeah, different land cover classes, they have different EMC values. So can you clarify the question, Stacy?
Yeah, sorry, I had to find my unmute button. We've just been kind of talking about, like, you have high density residential, green spaces. So I don't know if my question is, I wasn't sure if anyone had looked at are those nutrient values that were calculated, the EMCs for specific land use categories, have those been looked at more recently than, say, like the 1990s or 2000s? I think that's when a lot of them were calculated. I just wonder, if these days maybe it's gotten better, like maybe we're better at capturing nutrients and not having as much runoff, or maybe it's worse,
I think there are. Even I remember that I had a report there was a report in 2015, and I'm sure that there are more recent one. Moshfegh, I think you used the EPA one. It's for 2021 that based on the land use, land cover, they came up with some equations that you can calculate the EMC values for each land use, land cover. So maybe we can share that with you. Those
Sure,
reports.
that's great. Yeah, anything you have that's more recent.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. No, it's I'm sure that there are more recent ones than 1990. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Can I have maybe I can find your email address, but if you can give the email address, maybe we can send you an email.
Yeah, I was gonna say I can connect you to.
Okay. Stay. All right, thanks.
Thank you for the update on this project. I think you'll see this group is pretty interested in what y'all are putting out there. So as you get further along, keep us in mind.
Yeah, sure.
We have time, for open discussion if you all want. I think, legislative session is ongoing. There's a couple weeks left. I don't know if there's anything that really warrants much of a discussion right now. I did also want to just let everyone know that DEP is in the process of looking at the BMAPs in our region, and both the BMAPs for the Alafaya River and for the Manatee River for both fecal and so for bacteriological impairments and for nutrient impairments. They'll be revisiting those BMAPs over the next year or so. And Anita Stein has also mentioned that the Hillsborough BMAP is probably not too far behind. So we've got a standing invitation to her when she feels like she has enough details to present some of that information to y'all and how that will play with the reasonable assurance plan. But just wanted to put that on your radar. Does anybody else have any announcements or things they'd like to share for the good of the order?
Hey guys, I just want to give the group, whoever's left, just a quick update on our seagrass mapping efforts. We're almost complete with our acquisition. It's been very challenging, as you can imagine, given this is an El Nino winter. It's been either cloudy, windy, or cloudy and windy, so it's been quite the challenge. But we have most of our flight lines complete. We may, we will be looking at flying some in March, which is outside our flight window, which is supposed to close tomorrow. But most of those flight lines that we have remaining are in the Nature Coast, Springs Coast area. There's a couple of them that are just kind of stragglers as well, but most of the flight lines are done. So we're reviewing the preliminary imagery, and we'll be doing the post-processing and color balancing in the next few weeks, and then we're going to move on to the photo interpretation. So we will definitely keep you guys posted as that process moves forward as we go throughout the months coming up.
Awesome, appreciate that update, Chris. Anyone else? If nothing else, our next meeting is scheduled for April 24th. We will offer it in a hybrid format, but we would love to see your smiling faces at the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council offices. So keep an eye out for the meeting notice. We'll see you then.